Okay, so just a prelude. I've got the tissue, so if I cry, I'm sorry. But it doesn't get easier for me to speak about my story as time goes, apparently. So I want to start off by giving a special thanks to all the people that were heavily involved in the organization of such an event that's planned to be a very great success. These people have been working days, nights, sometimes to have you all here, so thank you. Thank you all, and thank you for all the people that also have made the effort from coming abroad. I know some of you are from the United States. I see some of the people that I saw in the Czech Republic. I see people that are from Belgium. And this morning I saw someone who came here particularly, and I'm very, very grateful for all of this. So we're all here, and we know that surrogacy must end for the majority of us. Nonetheless, I want to say that surrogacy has to stop now, that it is urgent to start talking on an international level on how to stop this massacre by banning surrogacy worldwide, using an international convention like the Casablanca Declaration proposes. Countries need to start taking their responsibilities and start protecting the rights of women and children against the greedy surrogacy industry that, I must remind you, is estimated to reach $129 billion by 2032. So since I have the honor to speak amongst the most prestigious of panelists, I will stick about I'm going to stick to talking about my story. I've been speaking about my story in many countries now, so if it's a bit redundant for some of you, I'm very sorry, and I'm very happy for some of you to start hearing it today. So I want all of us to travel back 40 years in time before my conception. So my commissioning parents met. My commissioning mother already had a child from a previous union. My parents were two very successful people, two very smart people. So they were thriving in their careers, and their desire to start a family was beginning to emerge in their heads, but a little too late. At this stage, my mother was 48 and my father 37. And my mother, of course, was having problems with infertility. According to my father, with whom I had a discussion, he wanted a child of his own genes. He didn't want to adopt, so surrogacy was the only option available to them for having a child. So they decided to look into the United States, and more specifically Louisville, Kentucky, to find an agency that could help them find a surrogate mother. My parents gave the agency a list of criteria concerning the woman and what the woman should look like, because I was born through traditional surrogacy, not gestational, meaning that my surrogate mother biologically related to me, even though to me it makes no difference, since we know that the mother is, by definition, the one who carries the child. And we know the famous wording, mater semper certa est, the mother is always known. So about a year goes by, my parents have to be rematched because the first surrogate didn't work, so they used a second one. And it worked. Miracle. Just a few months after signing the contract. We always say that surrogacy agencies, we usually say this in the United States, but it's used worldwide. We say that surrogacy agencies look at women's psychology through very thorough tests, and that they make sure that they don't have any debts to pay. But we all know, I hope, that this is not true in every single case. $14 billion was the surrogacy market in 2022, so I'm not sure that all of them are going to start looking too closely at women who might lie, unfortunately, during their interview. My case is the perfect example. My surrogate is the perfect example of what a surrogate should never have been. But it is not her fault. She was unfortunately the victim of a system. The surrogacy agency, only saw what it wanted to see when it hired her. That is, the money that she could make them. They abused of a situation of a woman that needed money to feed her children and pay her bills. So I was born later on December 10th, 1991, a date that was chosen by my intended parents because it fell exactly between my intended mother and my surrogate mother. So I was born on December 10th. I was to be a Christmas baby, so that even was decided for me. So can you imagine, in surrogacy, we even plan out births? I'm not sure that's the best interest of the child, to be honest. And as soon as I was born, I was placed in the arms of my biological mother, my surrogate mother, who carried me for almost 9 months. The one who fed me, the one who spoke to me, the one in whom I felt every emotion invade her, the one who in the end was the only person I knew. I was put into a little basket on the side, and my surrogate mother, eventually I had a discussion with her. She told me that the first thing that I did was that I turned my head and I looked straight towards her. So that tells you that I, even at that point, was looking for my mother. At that point in time, as soon as I left my mother's womb, I had to take the sacrifice. I had to make the sacrifice for adults to have a desire, for the desires of adults to have a child. And that is terrible, because as a newborn, I was asked to sacrifice my mother, my origins, and this for adults. And that was the first trauma that would write the rest of my life, the trauma of abandonment. As a child, I showed signs of trauma of abandonment. I was already going through an inner battle. I mean, how could I really build myself not knowing where I came from? How could I know who to become who I was without knowing who I came from? It's impossible. So during my young adult life, I sank into alcohol addictions. I was raped. I was constantly putting myself on edge. I made, unfortunately, several suicide attempts. I was never able to find normal friendships. And as I would suffocate people, constantly trying to make them my friends. Because I was just simply scared that they would abandon me. So I was pushing people to eventually reject me, and these situations would, of course, push me into a depressive state. And it was hard. I was very, very much alone. I was very unstable. I could not even find a job. I mean, I couldn't hold a job. And I couldn't even finish my studies, to be honest, because of the severe depression phases that I went through. So if you're now, you have to follow me, because we're going to fast forward to December 2021. And I'm going to recount you the days that led to the discovery of my origins. Just a little side note, you have to understand that I'm a product of surrogacy. I've always felt it inside me. I was a baby made to order, a commodity for money. And I'm not sure that one can, it was hard for me to understand, how can one heal from this inhuman practice? How can one heal from this programmed abandonment? How can one accept it? How can we buy and sell children under the glorious name of surrogacy without asking ourselves, what will become these children in adulthood? These are thoughts, feelings, and questions that I've been wrestling with ever since I found out when I was around 17 years old, and I still wrestle with today. And my children now wrestle with these questions as well, because my emotions have been transmitted to my children. I want people to understand that children born from surrogacy can develop traumas, that the children to be born are too often forgotten when couples want to use surrogacy, and that surrogacy eventually, of course, needs to be abolished. So throughout my entire life, I've been telling everyone my personal story as a baby born from surrogacy, friends, my husband, my in-laws, my husband who's here today, and I thank him for being here. All with whom I could share my experience, my thoughts, my emotions, without any judgment, which I'm very grateful for. I talked about it so much, and I was maybe a pain, I have to say, to my husband and in-laws, that my mother-in-law, Pascal, who I think of today and who is one of my biggest supporters, she bought me a DNA test as a present for my 30th birthday on December 10th, 2021. So Pascal had been hearing me at that point for about 8 years, and she's been listening to me, and she's been seeing me, how much I suffered, how much I was constantly questioning everything. And she knew how difficult it was for me to not know where I came from, to not know my origins, and not to possess my own history. When she offered me this test, to be quite honest, I didn't dare open it immediately. I just kind of threw it in the drawer for a few days. I was afraid to take it. I was so afraid. Even though I knew everything already, and I knew what I would discover, but I felt dizzy. I felt I was petrified. And the night before taking the DNA test, after putting all of our children to bed, because yes, we are parents of 3 children, in the privacy of our bedroom, I shared all my doubts with my husband. Matthias, my husband, who's encouraged me, supported me, and he's known that he knew I was torn between doubt, anger, and wanting to know the truth, but also wanting to hide in a hole. And I remember at that time, I was in bed and I looked at my husband and I'm like, "Ugh, you know what? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've been telling all this story and maybe I'm a liar. Maybe I'm going crazy with this obsession." And I remember my husband kindly saying, "No," I remember this phrase, "No, sweetheart, instinct is rarely wrong. And besides, you've had enough clues pointing in that direction. So take the test and you'll know for sure." But I was panicking. I was suffering. 30 years of unanswered questions, unsaid things came back and haunted me. And what if I were wrong? Would I be able to look at my parents in the eyes? But at the same time, if I'm right, can I forgive them for buying me like a commodity? And my husband knew how to find the words and soothe all my wounds. And he told me, "No matter what happens, I'll be there without judgment. Staying without knowing your origins can destroy you, as it has been destroying you for the last 8 years I've known you. So take the test. You'll get through this, and I'll be there to support you." So my husband's gentle words helped me during those 5 days. It took me 5 days to take that test, where I was petrified. And he gave me the courage to face my most violent fears. Because yes, Matthias, who's here, the love of my life, my anchor, is the one who taught me what unconditional love is, and who patiently repaired me psychologically after the trauma of being ripped away from my mother. On December 15th, 2021, I had the courage to take the DNA test. So I rubbed it inside my mouth. I sent the DNA kit to Texas, I think it was in the United States. And a few weeks later, when the DNA test arrived, I remember it was nighttime. I opened my mailbox and I was like, "Oh God, what is this?" And I squinted my eyes and I read, "Dear Olivia, we're delighted to inform you that the results of your DNA kits are ready." I cannot begin to explain how fast my heartbeat was pounding at that very moment. I started violently shaking out of fear, and you can see that I'm shaking now, not of stress, but of emotion. It was 5:56 a.m. on January 11th, 2022. It was still dark and I could feel the cold French countryside weather. And at that moment, I knew my life was about to change. My 3 children, my husband were asleep, unaware of what I was sensed was about to happen. Like every night, I was the first to wake up. Like every night that I was born, insomnia pursued me. Like every night since I was born, I wonder why I had this discomfort inside me. And like every night since I was born, I asked myself why my life was made up of questions. So I got up and I could hardly breathe, and I decided to go take a breath of fresh air outside in the beautiful countryside in France, a country that I didn't feel like I belonged in at that point, but I didn't know precisely why. And I was turning in circles, and I remember going back into the room and looking at our youngest son, August, 3.5 months old at the time, and he was so calm, so serene. And I remember asking myself, at that age, was I like that? Or did I already feel the dread, the unfathomable fear, the immeasurable grief of having lost my mother? So it was 5:56 a.m. on that January 11th, 2022, that I received the email that would change the course of my life. I was going to know where I came from, who I was born of, and much more. I was finally going to be able to start healing. I decided to face the results alone, privately in my bed. That DNA test would eventually really reveal my ethnic background. So I'm largely composed of Lithuanian and Norwegian blood, but a miracle happened, as my DNA was matched in the database with what would be my cousin and my uncle. This cousin, for who I have a very special thought as well today, because it's thanks to her I found my half-brother, my half-sisters, my mother, who is my surrogate. This would lead me to finally put in the last piece of the puzzle of my life by talking to my mother and asking her the questions that were to me important for my healing. Thank you. I remember that my first reaction was, yes! It was like, oh, yes, I was right. I was right all along. My gut feeling was right. But I remember also this emotion of relief. And then I was angry. Angry that surrogacy exists and that could potentially hurt other children like me. So that's a very, very brief summary of my life, because it's a lot more complicated than that, I promise you. So I want to say, you don't regulate a bad practice, you abolish it. And I think that's the perfect phrase for this event, which promises to be very interesting from the point of view of our speakers. Indeed, we're all here to try understand how we can concretely abolish the practice of surrogacy throughout the world. This practice has gone on for far too long without any concrete action being taken on an international level. So today, on April 5th, 2024, as a child born from surrogacy, I implore states to begin drafting an international convention by taking the Casablanca Declaration as an example. I stand before you, as I have said, as a child born through surrogacy, but I want you to understand that my words have a cost high with consequences. My voice and my story are uncommon in the public sphere, but we're used to having the beautiful stories of commissioning parents or even children who have become happy young adults, and I want to say that I am not here to denigrate or dismiss the fact that these beautiful stories exist. They do exist. Nor am I here to point fingers at them to say that they are lying. On the contrary, it's a good thing that these stories exist, and I wish these people infinite happiness. I always like to point out that I do not blame my commissioning parents. I do not blame any parents for having used surrogacy, as they only used something that was offered to them on a silver platter. I blame the countries, the governments, that let surrogacy be legal, that do not take actions to stop surrogacy within their countries and for citizens to go abroad and bring back a child. However, I'd like to add a nuance. There are not only beautiful stories, and no, we can't say that these beautiful stories are part of the majority, because suffering people have a tendency, they don't talk, because they're traumatized. And some of them won't talk, never will talk, and maybe you will hear more stories in the future. I want you to know that it's a lot more difficult to speak today the way I do than it is to sell you a fairy tale. Taking my stand, that is raising all the problems linked to surrogacy for the child, exposing myself by revealing my unhappy story is not cool, it's not trendy. I'm not Instagrammable. I'm often called a lot of words, horrible words, homophobe, fascist, I'm denigrated, called a liar. I was even told recently that I was spreading fake news. And it's tough to take in emotionally. And believe me, sometimes I would love to wake up in the morning. I would have loved to wake up that one morning and said, well, Olivia, why couldn't you have lied and said that your life was just a fairy tale, that surrogacy was wonderful? I've been through the worst times in my life. Drugs, alcohol, rape, suicide attempts. I could have laid back and enjoyed a little bit of this life after all my misfortunes, but I didn't. In June 2023, when I decided to take this stance for the universal abolition of surrogacy, I knew that I was going to pay certain inseparable costs. I lost the relationship with my parents. I lost the relationship with members of my family. I was, of course, accused, and I still am, of many absurd and false things. But in return, I knew that taking this position would heal me internally, that I had the moral, the ethical, the good behind me, and I regret absolutely nothing. I finally know who I am. I know my genetic heritage. I know my complete family tree. I know who carried me. I even was able to meet my half-brother 2 weeks ago during a trip in New York where when we spoke at the site event at the United Nations on surrogacy. And it was one of the happiest days of my life. Well, after, of course, the birth of our children and my marriage. That's it. Sorry. But meeting him was, I can't begin to explain to you. It was the most emotional moment in which a big brother got to spend a day with his little sister after 32 years of separation. And so thanks to my speaking out, thank you. Thanks to my speaking out, I know where I come from. I know finally what the person I want to become. And I want to become a person that spreads the truth about surrogacy. The truth that people are afraid to show us in the media. Too afraid to offend some of the population. Marcel Proust once said, "The true voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes." So it's time to put on these new eyes on surrogacy and start making real changes in our society. We can't continue to turn a blind eye to what I believe is human trafficking 2.0. Many children born through surrogacy will never speak out. You must understand, we children born from surrogacy have a huge loyalty conflict. We've been bought, wanted, desired, manufactured, so, according to many, we don't have the right to suffer, to be unhappy. And for some people, we should just shut up and thank surrogacy for our existence, for being alive. And I don't agree with that. We have the right to say that for many of us, it has screwed us up. Again, I'm aware that there will be some great stories, and I'll say thankfully. I'll add to that no child is absolutely condemned to miss out on life, whatever the circumstances of their birth is, but that surrogacy inflicts a real wound on the child. The fact is that this wound can be overcome, which is by no means easy and requires a great deal of effort and support and psychological help. But it's not a reason to put that into perspective, the fact that it is inflicted on the child in order to satisfy a desire. I would like to remind that there is no right to have a child. It doesn't exist, and I hope it never will, but that children do have rights that are in the UNCRC, and that surrogacy, we can say, violates many of these rights before the child coming to life. So just like surrogate-born children, many women who have become surrogates can't take a drastic stance against surrogacy. These mothers are often trapped, either by the mafia, the cartels, who prevent them from speaking out by threatening to kill them, or because they have confidentiality clauses that doom them to legal action and immeasurable costs. These women, very often in need of money, are bound hand and feet tied. Exactly a year ago, on April 5th, 2023, which I thought was actually quite funny, but the quote is not funny. We had the director of Biotechcom agency in Ukraine confess that, and I quote, "We are looking for women in the former Soviet republics because logically they have to be from poorer places than our clients. I have not met a single woman with a good economic situation who has decided to go through this process out of kindness because she thinks she has enough children and wants to help someone else who wants them." So that tells you everything. So I'll give him a point for his honesty, but I'll take it away for his extreme cruelty. Gloria Ruiz, who is a former surrogate that I hope you all will be hearing about in the next few months, decided to take a stance for the abolition of surrogacy, and Jennifer Law here interviewed her. I wish that everyone went and saw this video because it's terrible. She's taking huge risks, and Gloria, and is exposing herself to lawsuits. She was a surrogate for a couple, a 55-year-old lady and her husband that I must add had a sexually transmitted infection that was hid from the agency, that the agency hid from Gloria, sorry. Her story is extremely shocking, and I mean, you have to go see the video to comprehend it. Gloria went through absolute hell, so much that she was admitted into a mental health clinic for 2 months, and she is now on lifelong antidepressants and mood stabilizers. So I asked her to write a small text for me for you to listen, but since I don't have so much time, I'm just going to give you an excerpt. So, and I quote, "My name is Gloria Ruiz Orozco, and I would like to share some of the abuse that I went through as a surrogate. I was trapped into a contract by the agency stating that if I chose to back out, I would be liable for thousands of dollars. This is a tactic used by agencies in the US to scare you into compliance. I was matched with a set of parents that had not gone through a psychological evaluation, information that was committed to me until it was too late. I wasn't allowed to pick out my own health insurance policy, and everything I was promised during the matched meeting disappeared once contracts were signed. During the pregnancy, I was spoken to in an inappropriate way. I was harassed by mail, text. I was sent pictures of my own house from the commissioning mother. I was held at an appointment against my will when I was begging and crying to leave because my special needs son was having a panic attack at school. Too many people are denied adoptions, are still finding ways to buying babies because there is no law preventing them from doing so. I know we have a long road ahead of us, but I will make it my lifelong mission to keep educating the world and sharing my horrific story about the truth of surrogacy. So I want to thank Gloria today for taking such sacrifices to try and stop surrogacy after everything she's been through. So once again, it's not because there are good stories in surrogacy that the practice is more ethical. In the days of slavery, when there were certainly good stories of happy, well-fed, well-dressed slaves, I'm sure they were happy, but does that make slavery legitimate? Absolutely not. There are 36 million slaves in the world today, even though it's abolished. Should we regulate on slavery then? No. I'm sure if we were to legalize the sale of organs, there would be great stories of people saved through the commodification of parts of our bodies. Would that make the practice more ethical? Absolutely not. And surrogacy is no different. Despite some beautiful stories, it's still the transfer of a child with the use of a contract. It's still the commodification of a child, of a human being in a contract, but also the renting of a woman for her reproductive system. You can add all the beautiful adjectives you want, altruistic, ethical. I've heard the worst adjectives, but it won't make the substance of the practice any more beautiful. Last word, I promise, and then I'll stop. I just want to finish my speech on pointing out that this issue transcends any political, ideological, or religious point of view. On this subject of surrogacy, we're placing ourselves above all of this. We're talking about children's rights, women's rights. We're talking about human dignity. Today and tomorrow, you will be hearing different people from different horizons speaking, and our diversity is our strength. Being so different, but uniting on this one subject, the universal ban of surrogacy, is essential. It is time that we start forging more alliances on this subject to be stronger together. So there was this one quote that I loved. Sometimes the most unlikely alliances are the ones that bring about the greatest change. And thank you.